Sir, you need to sit down. We haven't reached cruising altitude yet. The flight attendant's voice was calm, professional, but it carried that edge. The one that told you she wasn't asking. The man in 8A didn't care. He was already on his feet, his bulk blocking the aisle, his face red as he jabbed a finger toward the front of the plane. He wasn't listening to her. He wasn't listening to anyone. His eyes were locked on the cockpit door, and everyone in the first few rows could feel the heat rolling off him. Before this story goes any further, take a second to subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. The girl in 9 billions watched him from her seat, her small frame pressed back into the blue fabric, trying to make herself smaller. She was 12 years old, traveling alone for the first time. Her straight dark brown hair fell across her shoulders, and her wide eyes were fixed on the man's back, watching the way his shoulders moved when he breathed, watching the way his fists clenched and unclenched at his sides. She'd noticed him during boarding. Everyone had. He'd shoved past people in the jet bridge, barked at an elderly woman who was too slow getting her bag into the overhead. The flight attendants had exchanged a look then, the kind of look adults share when they're signaling to each other. Keep an eye on that one. Now he was standing, and the plane was still climbing. Sir, I need you to return to your seat immediately, the flight attendant said again, stepping into the aisle to block his path. She was younger than him, smaller than him, and she knew it, but she held her ground. We cannot have anyone standing right now. It's a safety regulation. I don't care about your regulations, he snapped, his voice loud enough to carry over the hum of the engines. I need to talk to the pilot now. The girl in 9B pulled her knees up slightly, tucking her feet beneath her. She'd seen this kind of anger before. She'd learned to read it the way some kids learn to read the weather, watching for the shift in pressure, the change in temperature, the moment when the air gets heavy and you know something's about break. Her father had that same anger, the kind that didn't need a reason, the kind that just existed waiting for an excuse to come out. A man across the aisle, middle-aged, wearing a baseball cap, half stood. Hey, buddy, why don't you sit down and let them do their jobs? The angry man spun on him. You want to mind your own business? The guy in the cap hesitated. He looked at the angry man's size, at the look in his eyes, and he sat back down. The girl in 9B didn't blame him. She knew how this worked. She knew that most people, when faced with that kind of heat, would fold. It was safer. It was smarter. You didn't poke the bear unless you were willing to get mauled. The flight attendant tried again, her voice dropping lower, more controlled. Sir, if you don't sit down, I'm going to have to inform the captain, and we may need to involve authorities when we land. That was the wrong thing to say. The girl saw it immediately. The man's face went from red to purple, and he took a step toward the flight attendant, crowding her space. You think I'm scared of authorities? You think I'm scared of anything? I've got rights. I've got a right to speak to the person flying this tin can. Another flight attendant appeared from the back, a man this time taller, broader. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, positioned between the angry man and the rest of the cabin. But the girl could see it in his eyes, too. The calculation. The weighing of options. The knowledge that if this escalated, there wasn't much they could do at 30,000 feet. And then the cockpit door opened. The pilot stepped out. He was older, maybe late 50s, with blonde gray hair and the kind of face that had spent years commanding respect. He didn't look intimidated. He didn't look worried. He looked annoyed, like this was an inconvenience he didn't have time for. He walked straight up to the man, meeting him in the aisle, and for a second the two of them just stood there, sizing each other up. I'm Captain Harris, the pilot said. What seems to be the problem? The angry man puffed up, emboldened by the attention. The problem is I've been watching, I've been paying attention, and I know something's wrong. I heard something in the engine back there, a noise, a bad noise, and nobody's telling me anything. The pilot's expression didn't change. Sir, the aircraft is functioning normally. The crew is trained to handle any situation. There's nothing for you to be concerned about. Don't tell me what to be concerned about, the man shot back, jabbing his finger toward the pilot's chest. I know planes. I've been flying for 20 years, and I'm telling you that sound wasn't right. The pilot's jaw tightened. The girl could see it, the flicker of something behind his eyes. Impatience, contempt. The way adults sometimes looked at children when they asked too many questions. He was done with this conversation. He was about to shut it down. But then the girl heard it, a faint sound buried beneath the drone of the engines, a subtle change in pitch, like a car struggling to start on a cold morning. It was there for a second, then gone. She looked at the pilot, waiting for him to react, but he didn't. He was too focused on the man in front of him. "Sir," the pilot said, his voice dropping to something cold and authoritative, "you need to sit down now, or I will have you restrained." The man didn't move. He stood his ground, chest out, chin up, ready for a fight. And in that moment, the girl in 9B realized something. She realized that everyone in this cabin was looking at the wrong thing. They were all so focused on the angry man, on the confrontation, on the drama playing out in the aisle, that they weren't listening. They weren't paying attention to what mattered. She was. She'd spent her whole life listening for the shift in footsteps, the change in breathing, the moment before a door slammed. She'd learned to hear what other people missed, because missing it could mean the difference between safety and chaos. And she heard it again. The engine, a cough, a stutter, a sound that didn't belong. She looked past the pilot, past the angry man, toward the front of the plane, toward the cockpit, toward the controls that no one in this cabin knew how to read except the man standing in the aisle, too busy arguing to notice that something was very, very wrong. And then, without thinking, without planning, without any idea what she was about to set in motion, she spoke. "Captain?" Her voice was small. So small it almost got swallowed by the noise. But something in the way she said it, something in the tone, made the pilot turn. He looked at her. This kid, this little girl with wide eyes and dark hair, pressed into her seat like she was trying to disappear. "What?" he said. It wasn't kind, it was impatient, dismissive. She swallowed, her throat was dry, her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her temples. But she'd learned something else growing up in that house. She'd learned that sometimes the only way to survive was to speak, even when your voice shook, even when you were terrified, especially then. "The engine," she said. I think something's wrong with the engine." For a second, nobody moved, and then the pilot's expression changed. Her name was Ellie, and she had never been on an airplane before. That wasn't entirely true. She'd been on a plane once when she was 7 to visit her grandmother in Florida. But she didn't remember much about it, just the pressure in her ears and the way her mother had held her hand during takeoff, squeezing tight, whispering that everything was going to be okay. That was 5 years ago, before her mother left, before her father's anger had nowhere to go but at her. Now she was 12, and she was flying alone from Phoenix to Seattle to spend the summer with an aunt she'd never met. Her father had arranged it. He'd said he needed a break, needed space, needed to not have to look at her face every day, reminding him of what he'd lost. He hadn't said it like that. He'd said it like, "You'll have fun, your aunt wants to meet you." But Ellie knew. She'd learned to read between the lines. The flight was supposed to be 4 hours. 4 hours of sitting still, keeping quiet, not bothering anyone. That was the deal. That was always the deal. Don't make noise, don't take up space, don't give anyone a reason to notice you. But she'd already broken that rule. She'd noticed the man in 8A the moment he sat down. He was big, not just tall, but wide, with thick arms and a neck that seemed to blend into his shoulders. His hair was thin on top, and he had the kind of face that looked permanently unhappy, lines carved deep around his mouth, eyes that squinted at everything like it personally offended him. He'd argued with the gate agent about his seat. He'd argued with the flight attendant about his bag. He'd argued with the woman next to him about the armrest. And she'd eventually just given up and moved to an empty row farther back. Ellie knew that look. She knew the way a person's voice could go from annoyed to dangerous without warning. She knew the signs, the clenched jaw, the white-knuckled grip on the armrest, the way he kept looking around like he was searching for something to be angry about. She'd seen it in her father 100 times. She'd learned to read it the way sailors read clouds. So when he stood up during the climb, when he started yelling at the flight attendant, she wasn't surprised. She was scared. Her whole body was scared, trembling in that deep-down way that had nothing to do with temperature. But she wasn't surprised. This was how the world worked. Men got angry, women tried to calm them down, and everyone else looked away because looking away was easier. But then she heard the engine. It was subtle. So subtle that if she hadn't been listening, really listening, the way she did at home when her father's footsteps changed on the stairs, she would have missed it. A slight hesitation in the hum, a beat that didn't quite land, like a heart skipping. She knew that sound. Not from planes, from cars. Her father's old truck, the one he'd had before he sold it for parts, It used to make that sound sometimes, a little stutter in the engine, and he'd curse and pound the dashboard and tell her to get out while he figured out what was wrong. She'd sit on the curb and watch him work, and she'd hear that sound again and again, until finally one day, the truck just wouldn't start. This was that sound. Only this wasn't a truck, this was a plane. This was 30,000 feet in the air, and nobody else seemed to notice. The pilot was still focused on the angry man. The flight attendants were focused on the pilot. The passengers were focused on the drama, on the confrontation, on the possibility of a fight. Nobody was listening to the engines. Ellie didn't know anything about airplanes. She didn't know how they worked or what sounds were normal or what the pilot should or shouldn't be doing. But she knew that sound. She knew it in her bones, the way you know the sound of your own front door opening, the way you know the difference between a safe footstep and a dangerous one. And when the pilot turned to look at her, when he asked what, like she was wasting his time, she almost didn't say anything. She almost did what she always did. She almost made herself small and quiet and invisible. But then she thought about her mother. She thought about the last time she saw her, standing in the doorway with a suitcase saying, "I'm sorry, baby, I just can't." She thought about how her mother had looked at her father, how she'd known something was coming and hadn't warned Ellie, hadn't pulled her aside and said, "When he gets like this, you hide." She just left. She just walked away. And Ellie had promised herself, somewhere deep down where she didn't even know the promise lived, that she would never again stay silent when something mattered. So she spoke. "The engine," she said again. I think it's struggling." The pilot stared at her for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. Behind him, the angry man was still talking, still gesturing, still demanding attention. But the pilot wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking at Ellie. And then he did something that made her stomach drop. He turned away from her and walked toward the cockpit, not because of what she'd said, not because he believed her, but because he was done with the conversation, because he had a plane to fly and no time to entertain a scared kid or an angry passenger. He dismissed her the way adults always dismissed her, with a look that said, "You don't know what you're talking about." The cockpit door closed behind him, and the angry man, left standing in the aisle with nowhere to direct his rage, turned his eyes on Ellie. For a long, horrible moment, nobody moved. The angry man stood in the aisle, his chest heaving, his fists clenched, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. He was looking at Ellie, directly at Ellie, and she could feel it, the weight of his attention, the heat of his anger, the way he was searching for a target and finding her. "What did you say?" His voice was low, dangerous, not yelling anymore, something worse. Ellie couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up, her tongue glued to the roof of her mouth. She pressed herself deeper into the seat, wishing she could disappear into the fabric, wishing she could be anywhere but here. "I asked you a question," the man said, taking a step toward her row. "What did you say to him?" The flight attendant, the young woman who'd been trying to calm him down, stepped into his path again. "Sir, leave her alone. She's a child." "She's sticking her nose where it doesn't belong," he snapped. "She's distracting the pilot. She's making this worse." Ellie wanted to explain. She wanted to tell him she wasn't trying to make anything worse, that she'd only said something because she was scared, because she'd heard something, because she thought maybe, just maybe, she could help. But the words wouldn't come. They never did when she needed them most. That was another thing she'd learned at home. When the anger was aimed at you, the best thing to do was nothing. Don't move. Don't speak. Don't give them anything to grab onto. But the man wasn't done. He took another step, and now he was right next to her row, looming over her, his bulk blocking the light from the overhead bins. "You think you're special? You think you know something the rest of us don't? You're just a kid. Kids don't know anything." The flight attendant grabbed his arm. "That's enough. Back off now." He shook her off like she was nothing. "I'm not touching her. I'm just talking. I've got a right to talk." From somewhere behind Ellie, a voice spoke up. "Leave her alone, man. She didn't do anything." It was the guy in the baseball cap, the one who'd tried to intervene before and back down. He was standing now, and this time he didn't look like he was going to sit back down. His hands were raised slightly, palms out, a gesture of peace, but his eyes were hard. The angry man turned to face him. "You again. You got a death wish?" "I got a phone," the guy in the cap said, holding it up, "and I'm recording this. So whatever you do next, it's going on the internet." That gave the man pause. He stared at the phone, then at the guy holding it, then back at Ellie. For a second, she thought it might work. She thought maybe the threat of consequences, of witnesses, of evidence, might be enough to make him walk away. But she'd seen this before, too. She'd seen how anger, real anger, didn't care about consequences. It fed on them. It grew stronger when it was challenged. The man took a step toward the guy in the cap. "You want to put that phone down and say that to my face?" And then, from the front of the plane, a sound. Not the engine this time. Something else. A chime. A voice over the intercom. "This is the captain. We're experiencing a minor technical issue. Flight attendants, please take your seats for the time being." The voice was calm, professional, exactly the same tone the pilot had used when he'd been arguing with the angry man. But something was different. Something in the pause between words. Something in the way he said minor, like he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. The angry man froze. Everyone froze. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the engines. And now that everyone was listening, now that everyone was paying attention, they could hear it too. That hesitation, that stutter, that sound that didn't belong. The flight attendant's face went pale. She recovered quickly, masking it with professionalism, but Ellie saw it. She saw the flicker of fear. "Everyone needs to return to their seats immediately," the flight attendant said, her voice pitched higher than before. "We'll have more information shortly." The angry man didn't move. He was still standing in the aisle, still blocking the path, but his anger had shifted. It wasn't aimed at Ellie anymore. It wasn't aimed at anyone. He was listening. They were all listening. And then the engines changed. It was subtle at first, a slight drop in pitch, a softening of the vibration that ran through the floor. But then it got worse, a shudder, a cough. The plane lurched slightly, just enough to make everyone grab their armrests. The guy in the cap dropped his phone. It clattered to the floor, and he didn't even reach for it. He was gripping his seat, knuckles white, eyes wide. The flight attendant stumbled, caught herself on a seat back, and grabbed the nearest intercom. "Everyone stay calm. Stay in your seats. The lights flickered, and then from the cockpit a voice over the speakers. Not the captain this time. Someone else. The first officer, maybe. Or just someone who'd forgotten to turn off the mic. "Can't get it stable. We're losing pressure on the..." The voice cut off. The plane shuddered again, harder this time. A woman screamed somewhere in the back. A man started praying, loud and desperate, in a language Ellie didn't understand. And in the middle of it all, the angry man stood frozen, his anger drained away, replaced by something Ellie recognized all too well. Fear. Real fear. The kind that strips away everything else. The kind that leaves you raw and small and helpless. He looked at Ellie, not with anger this time, with something else, confusion maybe, or desperation. "You heard it," he said. His voice was hoarse. "You heard it before anyone else." Ellie didn't answer. She couldn't. She was too busy listening, not to the engines this time, but to something else. A sound so faint she almost missed it. A sound coming from the front of the plane. Footsteps, running. And then the cockpit door burst open, and the pilot stumbled out. His face was ashen. His eyes were wild. He looked nothing like the calm, commanding figure who'd stood in the aisle minutes ago. He looked like a man who'd just seen something he couldn't explain. He scanned the cabin, searching for something, someone. And then his eyes landed on Ellie. He pointed at her. "You, the girl, what's your name?" Ellie's mouth opened, but nothing came out. "Your name," the pilot repeated, louder this time, desperate. "Tell me your name." "Ellie," she whispered. "It's Ellie." The pilot took a step toward her, then stopped. He looked at the flight attendants, he looked at the passengers, he looked at the angry man still standing in the aisle, still frozen. And then he said something that made no sense, something that in any other moment would have been absurd. The pilot's hand hung in the air, waiting. Ellie stared at it like it was a foreign object, something she'd never seen before. Behind her, someone was crying. The engines coughed again, a sick grinding sound that vibrated through the floor and up into her bones. The lights flickered once, twice, then held steady. "I don't understand," Ellie whispered. "I don't know anything about planes." The pilot knelt down in the aisle, bringing himself to her eye level. Up close, she could see things she hadn't noticed before. The sweat on his forehead, the tremor in his hands, the way his eyes kept darting toward the cockpit like he expected it to explode at any second. He was terrified. The captain of the plane was terrified, and he was looking at her like she was the only person in the world who could help. "You heard something," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Before anyone else, you heard the engine change." Ellie nodded slowly. It sounded like Like my dad's truck, before it died. Your dad's truck, the pilot repeated. Something shifted in his expression. Not hope exactly, something more fragile. Ellie, I've been flying for 30 years. I know these planes like I know my own hands. But whatever's happening up there, I've never heard anything like it. The instruments are showing one thing, but the sound is telling me something else, and I don't know which one to trust. The angry man was still standing there, frozen in the aisle, his earlier rage completely gone. He looked like a different person now, smaller, older, more human. What are you saying? You're the pilot. You're supposed to know what to do. The pilot ignored him. He kept his eyes on Ellie. When I was a kid, my grandfather taught me something. He said machines talk to you if you listen. Not the instruments, not the gauges. The machine itself, the heart of it. He said most people forget how to hear it because they get too comfortable with the screens and the numbers. But kids still remember. Kids still listen. Ellie thought about her father's truck. She thought about sitting on the curb, watching him work, listening to the engine complain. She'd heard it. She'd always heard it, but she'd never thought it meant anything. I don't know what I heard, she said. I just know it didn't sound right. The plane shuddered again, harder this time. A bag fell from an overhead bin somewhere in the back. The praying got louder. The flight attendant was on the intercom trying to calm everyone down, but her voice was shaking. The pilot stood up. He looked at the cockpit door, then back at Ellie. I need you to come up front. I need you to sit in the jump seat and just listen. Tell me what you hear. Tell me if it changes. Tell me if it sounds like your dad's truck. That's insane, the angry man said. She's 12. You can't put a 12-year-old in the cockpit. The pilot turned on him, and for a second the anger was back. Not the cold, dismissive anger from before, but something sharper, more desperate. You got a better idea? You know something about planes? You want to come up there and tell me what's wrong? The angry man opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at Ellie. She saw something in his eyes then, shame maybe, or recognition, the kind of moment when you realize you've been so focused on yourself, on your own anger, your own fears, that you forgot there were other people in the world. Real people, with real lives. He stepped aside. Ellie unbuckled her seatbelt. Her legs felt like they didn't belong to her, like she was walking on someone else's bones. The flight attendant reached out and touched her shoulder as she passed, a quick, gentle squeeze that said more than words could. The cockpit door was heavier than she expected. The pilot held it open for her, and she stepped inside. It was smaller than she'd imagined. Filled with screens and switches and dials, everything blinking and beeping in a language she didn't understand. The first officer was in the right seat, a younger man with a sweat-soaked shirt and eyes that were too wide. He looked at Ellie like she was an alien. What's she doing here? She's listening, the pilot said. He guided Ellie to the jump seat, a little fold-down bench behind the two pilots. Sit there, don't touch anything, just listen. Ellie sat. The seat was hard and uncomfortable. Through the windshield, she could see nothing but clouds, endless white stretching in every direction. No ground, no sky, just clouds. The engines coughed again. This time she felt it in her chest, a deep rattling vibration that didn't feel right. There, she said. That's the sound. The pilot and the first officer exchanged a look. The first officer shook his head. The instruments are steady. Fuel pressure is normal. There's no indication of... Forget the instruments, the pilot snapped. Listen. They sat in silence. The seconds stretched into minutes. The clouds kept rolling past. The engines hummed, coughed, hummed again. And then Ellie heard it. Faint at first, then clearer. A rhythm, a pattern. It's skipping, she said, like a heartbeat, like it's missing every fourth beat. The first officer stared at his screens. There's nothing here. Everything's green. The pilot leaned forward, his face inches from the windshield as if he could see the problem. She's right. I feel it too. It's subtle, but it's there. The engines coughed again, and this time the plane dipped. Just a few feet, but enough to make Ellie's stomach lurch. The first officer grabbed his harness. We need to descend, he said. We need to get lower now. The pilot was already reaching for the controls, but he stopped. He turned to look at Ellie. What do you hear? He asked. Right now, what do you hear? Ellie closed her eyes. She thought about her father's truck. She thought about the way it sounded when it was about to die. A kind of gasping, choking noise like it was trying to breathe and couldn't. But this wasn't that. This was different. This was something else. It's not dying, she said slowly. It's fighting. Like it wants to keep going, but something's stopping it. The pilot's eyes widened. He turned back to the controls and started flipping switches, adjusting dials. doing things Ellie couldn't follow. The first officer was talking fast, reading numbers, pointing at screens. And then, suddenly, the coughing stopped. The engine smoothed out. The vibration eased. The plane felt solid again, steady, the way it had been at the beginning of the flight. The first officer stared at his screens. "We've got stability. Fuel pressure is evening out. I don't understand. I didn't change anything." The pilot sat back in his seat. He was breathing hard, his face pale, his hands shaking. He looked at Ellie. "You were right," he said. "It wasn't the engine, it was the fuel flow. A blockage. Something small but enough to cause a cascade if we'd ignored it. The instruments couldn't detect it because it was intermittent, but you heard it. You heard the pattern." Ellie didn't know what to say. She sat there in the jump seat, her heart pounding, her hands gripping her knees so hard they ached. The first officer looked at her differently now. They both did, like she wasn't just a kid anymore. The pilot reached for the intercom. "This is the captain. The technical issue has been resolved. We're going to continue to our destination. Please remain seated, and thank you for your patience." He set the mic down and turned to Ellie. "You saved this plane," he said quietly, "not because you knew something I didn't, but because you listened when no one else was." Ellie thought about her father. She thought about all those nights she'd sat in her room, listening to his footsteps, waiting for the moment when the anger would shift from the walls to her. She'd learned to listen because she had to, because listening was survival. She never thought it would save anyone else. The clouds broke. Below them she could see the ground, mountains, then desert, then the first scattered lights of a city. Phoenix was behind her, Seattle was ahead, and somewhere in the cabin a man was sitting in seat 8A, staring at the seat back in front of him, wondering how he'd gotten everything so wrong. From which part of the country are you watching this story?